listen, we don't get scared, and we don't judge. Let me tell you guys a story time of how this lady that used to watch me after school wanted to initiate me into witchcraft by introducing me to her zombie. She basically wanted me to take over her little thing. I think around this time I was 6 or 7 years old, and school came out at 1:30, and my mom was not back home yet, so my transport would fetch me from school and take me to this lady's house, and then my mom would take me and would go fetch me from that lady's house and take me back home. Right? She was a sweet lady. Like, when I got to her house, she would make me food, like a responsible adult, make me food, ask me if I have homework, help me with my homework, and then after we would talk about what happened at school. She'd tell me some stories about her life, about her son. Remember, this lady used to have a son, okay? So one time I get to her place, it's after school or whatever, and she's watching those shows that used to air on SABC 2 on Fridays at 9 p.m. But it was repeating, if you get what I mean, right? Sharp. She's like, so we're watching or whatever, and it's the one show, Lisilo. If you guys know, you know. If you don't, I'm sorry. Just go research it and you'll see what I'm talking about. And Lisilo appears in that one scene, and I was scared as hell. So I asked her, like, damn, what is that? She's like, oh, so this is basically... So she explains to me what a zombie is. She's like, so basically Lisilo is a zombie. This man... is using Lisilo for witchcraft or whatever. She's like, do you ever in your life want to see a zombie? And I'm like, no, because I'm scared. We're laughing. I'm thinking she's joking. She's like, oh, one day you'll see one. I'm like, ha, because I'm not taking it serious, So the following day, I go back to her house again, obviously for daycare, and she's cooked a full Sunday course, like 7 colors, babe. And I'm like, Eva, now what's the occasion? She's like, oh, she just cooked whatever. So she dishes up for 3 people. I mean, it's just the 2 of us, so who's the third person, right? I eat, finish my food, she eats, she finishes her food, and then she takes the plate, and the third plate, right? And she's like, do you want to see who I'm going to give this to? I'm like, yeah. She's like, okay, let's go around the house. So we go behind the house, and it's this hut, right? It's not really a classic hut, but it's a hut that's made out of cement, but you can tell it's a hut. So you get. So she gets in there, she opens the door, and I can't see anything, right? And she leaves a plate at the door. And she's like, do you want to see what that is? I'm like, yeah. So I walk in, like, I'm starting to get a little bit scared. My skin hairs are standing up, like something is wrong, right? But then I go in there boldly. As soon as I enter, guys, she closes the door. When I tell you, it was the light outside. There was the sun, and the way inside of that room was so dark. I remember the fear that was in my chest. It was so dark. Mind you, there's no curtains on the windows. All of a sudden, I hear this thing. And then... Guys, I know it sounds funny, but I'm serious. How I'm hearing these sounds, I look behind me, and this heavy wind starts just swirling. Like, there's just wind, it's dark as hell, and I'm hearing this thing that's just running around this room, and I'm scared as hell. Like, what is going on? Guys, I started screaming, I'm crying. I don't know if she heard me or what, but I'm screaming and crying. Eventually I just cover my face and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs. Like, I lost my voice that day because I kept on screaming, like, I'm scared. Eventually I'm crying, calling my mom's name, and she opens the door, and then she lets me out. Mind you, that room is dark as hell. I don't know what the hell I saw, but like, when I opened my eyes to peek, guys, I could see this thing running around, and it was scary as hell, and it didn't have any hair, mind you. So after she lets me out, she's like, did you see, and whatever, and I'm just like it was mucus everywhere. I had tears. I had mucus running down my nose. I had saliva out of my mouth. It was just the scariest experience. I never want to experience anything like that ever again. And she's like, don't worry, you'll get used to it. Get used to it. Hey, okay, sharp. And then she's like, so basically I calmed down, right, after a couple of minutes, and she tells me that this thing's name is Teula. Okay, she's like, if I want to summon Teula to do anything for me, like if a kid bullies me at school, or maybe this one fights me and I couldn't find them back, I should call Teula 3 times, like Teula, 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 and Teula will appear. And I'm just like, why are you telling me all of this? Yo, guys, I tell you, I don't remember what time it was, but I felt like it was the longest time ever because I was waiting for my mom to get back from work so I can get away from this crazy lady. My mom comes to pick me up and I'm just quiet the whole ride because she's taking me back home. But this lady's house was not far from like my house. It was like a couple of streets away, but you know, my mom had a car, so she picked me up and then she took me back home, you know? So we're there at home, guys, and we're just chilling, and my mom is like, how was daycare? And I'm just not answering her. Like, I tell her I want to go to sleep because I'm tired. I had a headache because I was crying so much, right? Sharp. It was time for me to go to sleep. I used to sleep with my older sister, and my older sister would never allow me to hug her because I was scared, right? I don't know how, I don't know who, I don't know what happened, but my mind was like Teula 3 times because I think it was testing me, and that thing appeared. I saw it this time. But like obviously it wasn't in the dark no more because the street lights were reflecting inside the house. So I seen this thing just running around, and it's asking why did I call it, obviously in my language, and it's like, why did you call me? And I'm just like, ah. I started crying. I was shaking. Luckily, my mom was going to the bathroom and she heard me. She's like, what's wrong? I'm like, hey, I'm having a nightmare. I didn't tell her what I saw because I thought to myself, if I tell her, she's going to tell this lady. Well, understand? So I started crying, whatever, and then I slept in the same room as my mom. Next morning, it was time for me to go to school. I went to school, but when it was time for me to go to daycare, I didn't go to daycare. The transport driver left me at the gate. I walked back home because my older siblings were at home. They just couldn't take care of me because they were not so old as well, you know? I walked back home and the lady called my mom like, where is the girl? And my mom was like, she's not there. And they called my older siblings and my older siblings was like, I'm right here. So, you know, my mom got back the next day and then she told the transport driver that when he picks me up from school and takes me to aftercare, he must make sure I go inside the house because me, I'm naughty and I go back home. Sana, the next day, they take me to aftercare and they make sure I go inside. The lady's like, don't be scared. Hey. I'm like, hey, my sister, yeah. Guys, I sat down. When she asked me to go outside, I refused. When she asked me to do this, I refused. I just watched TV and she's like, you'll get used to it. The following day, guys, I was supposed to go to school, guys. I cried because I was like, ain't no way. And my mom was like, what's going on, guys? I cried. My transport is there hooting outside. I had a seizure. I acted like I had a seizure because I fell on the floor and I started shaking. And my mom is like, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? So she's stressed, guys. Well, she eventually tells my transport driver to leave so that she can deal with this and then she'll take me to school, right? So my mom keeps on asking me like, what is the problem, guys? I eventually come down and explain to her what I have seen at that lady's house, you know, and I told her I didn't want to tell her because I thought that she wasn't going to believe me. Shabu, she takes me to this man that she trusts. I don't know what this man is. I don't know what to call him, a traditional healer or a prophet. I don't know, but she took me to this man. And so this man, when we get there, explains to my mom that this lady that was taking care of me, basically at one point she wanted to become a ritualist and she wanted to make money through a snake. And guys, traditional healers will never tell you the consequences of what you're doing, right? They will just give you a snake and be like, oh, don't worry, it just requires you to give it 200 rands. It's going to be okay. It's going to be fine. Knowing very well that what you're doing is going to have consequences in the end, right? So she wanted to be a ritualist. Unfortunately, the snake that they gave her was the wrong snake. She didn't even make money because that snake killed her son. It strangled her son isn't the snake was a spirit. The snake strangled the son and because the son's spirit could not rest when they buried the son, she had to take the son and use the son as a zombie. But she keeps the son in the back room. She doesn't really use the son for witchcraft or anything, but you know, she has started doing things like that. So remember I told you guys at the beginning of the story that this lady has a son? Yes, that exact son is Teula, the one that she keeps in the back room. So she's tired of guarding the son and she wanted to initiate me into this whole thing, but it was too soon. I mean, what? As young as I was, you wanted me to become a witch and also take care of a whole zombie, guys. I know. So, you know, the man helped us, whatever, and I don't remember what other things he told my mom. But I had to ask my mom about the story like a couple of days ago so that I can come and tell you guys like what the man had said. You know, don't think now, how do I remember all of this? But in essence, guys, I never went back to that lady. My older siblings took care of me and she probably knew why I didn't come back. But like, yeah, she never bothered me after that. So when your kids don't want to go to a place, make sure you investigate thoroughly so that your kids are safe, guys, because some people are molesters out here, some people are witches and they're going to teach your children witchcraft. Watch out.
I have been coming across so many stories lately about people that don't seem to be quite human. And I got another one for you. So this man says he was having a very interesting conversation with a woman at his bar top. He was working a double, and he said that earlier that day, he had taken care of her daughter at brunch time. She was like, oh my gosh, you got to meet my mom. You guys would get along so well. I'm going to bring her back for dinner. And so she does. So he meets this woman and learns that she does some type of medicine or healing work for wealthy individuals. She seemed to know everyone, but wasn't well known herself. And he kept prying for more information, and she kept it purposefully vague. She was able to verify certain details about certain people's lives that he knew personally. He gathered that they were very well off, and her husband did military work and was gone most of the time, and their daughter went to a very prestigious school. He said they talked for a few hours, and she was just so alluring to him. He said she was just so damn interesting and intelligent. He said it was weird. She could read him like a book, but not in a daunting way. As they were sharing stories back and forth, something dawned on him. He said he noticed that her skull was very elongated, but it was like perfectly hidden underneath her beautiful hair and a hat she was wearing. He said her skin was so dark, but her eyes were an electric blue, and she spoke so eloquently. It got to the point where he thought to himself, is she an alien? Side note, he said he'd been reading Dolores Cannon's Convoluted Universe series, and if you haven't gone down that rabbit hole, I suggest you do so. But anyway, he said, like clockwork, the moment he thought to himself that maybe she's an alien, she looks at him, made a little joke about how maybe she's an alien, and then winked at him. He said, it spun my head around, and I just laughed it off, but we both knew that she was reading my mind or something. He said the expression on her face was almost like she was thinking, this man just figured me out. He said she left shortly after that then, almost like the jig is up, and he's never seen her again. He says it still gives him goosebumps. He's like, psychic, alien, not sure, but it is a conversation he will never forget. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and follow for more creepy story time.
If doppelganger stories scare you or anything that impersonates another person scares you, scroll. This one is terrifying, and it happened to both my stepfather and my father. So when I was like really little, and I was probably 3 years old and my sister was like 1 year old, my mom and my dad, who were still together at the time, they're divorced now, moved into this little blue house in Wisconsin. It was absolutely perfect for the four of us. It was like a tiny little house, but so cute. Now, both my mom and my dad said that weird things would happen in the house, but it wasn't anything to really know. My dad had experiences his entire life, so when he had experiences that were small, it didn't really affect him. So one day, my dad is sitting on the couch and he's watching TV when he starts hearing this weird sound in the kitchen, and he doesn't know what it is at first, but then he realizes that it sounds like somebody is washing the dishes, and he's like, what? That can't be. Like, me and my sister are the only ones home. We're 1 and 3 years old. We're not washing the dishes. So something that's important to know is that my father lost part of his leg in a car accident when he was 8 years old. So he has a prosthetic leg. And when he was sitting on the couch, he wasn't wearing his prosthetic leg. But he's really freaked out and he wants to see what the sound is in the kitchen, or doesn't know, like maybe my mom's home and just didn't tell him, which would have been weird because he would have seen her walk through the door. But he gets off of the couch and he starts like crawling towards the kitchen. Apparently how the layout was, I don't remember it, is like, say like the couch is right here and the door was like over here and then the kitchen was behind me, right? So when he got off the couch, he like went around the couch and he went to the kitchen and he sees my mom and she's in the kitchen washing dishes. Now my mom's name is Amy, so he was like, Amy, what are you doing? And she just turned around and she looks at him and she gives him like this strange look at first. It's just like this flat look. He starts laughing a little bit and he's like, Amy, what do you do? How'd you get in here? What are you doing here? Yeah, I thought you were at work. And he said that the look on her face just like kind of dropped and she was just staring at him like this. And he was like, Amy, what is going on? And he reached up to like touch her, to like not walk over to her, crawl over to her and like touch her. And as he's reaching out, he hears the front door open and he turns his head and he sees my mom walking through the door. And my mom says to this day, she was like, I've never seen him look so horrified in my entire life. He then looks back into the kitchen and there's nobody in the kitchen. And he freaked out that entire night. He was telling my mom what he saw, and he's like, I swear to God, I just saw you. You were in the kitchen. You gave me this crazy look. I thought you were mad at me. And she was like, calm. She's trying to calm him down, but this really freaked him out. Now, what was scary, though, is that later on in life, they get divorced, right? And my mom meets my stepdad. His name is Clint. He's no longer with us. Now, my mom and stepdad used to go on vacation a lot, and I think they were on their honeymoon at this point. I'm not positive, but they were laying in bed, and it was the middle of the night. They were both sleeping, and my stepdad wakes up because he hears something, and he looks over by the window, and my mom is standing up by the window, and he's like, Amy, what are you doing? What's wrong? And she didn't respond to him, and he was like, Amy, what's wrong? The second time that he says it, she turns her head really slowly, looks at him like this, and just smiles. And he was like, what? At this point, he starts laughing a little bit, and he's like, what are you doing? And she just kept smiling at him. So he like went to go like get himself up, but when he went to get himself up to like push himself off the bed, he touched my mom's leg. She was laying behind him, and he turns his head really quick, and he looks over, he sees my mom laying behind him, and he turns his head back to the window, and she's gone. What's crazy about this story is my mom doesn't lie about anything, and she swears to God that she never told Clint ever what my dad experienced. She had actually forgotten about it because it was so long ago. And so the fact that he experienced this too was super strange. And what's weird about this is my sister and I didn't know about these occurrences till later on in life. My mom obviously didn't want to tell us when we were kids. And my sister and I have both talked to each other about how we have both had dreams about my mom, like a different version of my mom. Now, I don't remember my dreams specifically, but I have them often, and I remember them right when I wake up, and then I forget them. But it always gives me the most eerie feeling because my mom is such a good person, and in these dreams she is awful. Like, it's terrible. So I don't know why this thing targets my mom's husbands and then targets her daughters in their dreams, but it does, whatever this thing is. So I would love to know what you guys think this is. Like, do you think it's, like, I can't say the word, or do you think it's a doppelganger, or do you think it's just like something else portraying my mom? But I don't know. It's creepy. I do want to mention that I've told this story before, but it's when I very first started my account, and I told it as an anonymous story. I said that someone had sent it in to me just because at the time I wasn't comfortable saying that it was my own story. And the details, I didn't have all the details at the time. So the details are a little different in this story because I spoke to my father and my mom and got more details of the story. So it's a little different, but I have told the story before, but it was like the third story I ever told on my account. So I'm sure most of you have not heard it. And the ones of you that have heard it, you're the best for going that far back in my account. So drop all your thoughts, opinions, and suggestions down below, please.
The picture behind me is of one of the worst predators on the dark web, and a lot of people don't know about him. This is the story of Mr. Swirlface. Reminder, I tell a lot of dark true crime stories on this channel. Severe discretion is advised, but follow along if you'd like to hear more. So, to set the scene, the year is 2003. We were young and naive to the internet. We still just thought it was cat memes, chat rooms, and dial-up tones. So this was the first time the world came face to face with what I can only describe as the human cesspool of early internet predators on the dark web. And what's more frustrating is that it took years for police to catch him. And it wasn't because he was a mastermind or anything. It was literally because the police didn't know how to undo the swirl filter on his face. Meanwhile, in the darker corners of the web, hundreds of disturbing images began circulating showing young boys being exploited by a man whose face was digitally swirled. So investigators started to call him Mr. Swirlface. If it happened today, you could probably give this picture to a 12-year-old to undo this effect. But this is 2003, and unswirling an image like that was the equivalent of sorcery. As back then, most police work was in the field and dealt with fingerprints and physical crime scenes. They were just ill-equipped and unprepared for a predator who existed exclusively online. These images were traced to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Thailand, so Interpol launched something called Operation Vico, which quickly became one of the most publicized global internet manhunts ever. Meanwhile, new images kept appearing online, featuring the same horrific content and featuring the same assailant with the swirled face. But finally, investigators caught a break. The police found a German digital forensics expert who was able to unswirl the face. How did he do it? Well, he literally spent 4 years manually reversing the swirl, frame by frame. So it is now 2007, and the swirl was successfully unswirled, and the face emerged. So who was it? It was revealed to be someone named Christopher Paul Neal. So who is Christopher Neal? He is a man from Canada, and he also happens to be a teacher. He had even considered becoming a priest and served as a chaplain for teenagers. And knowing what we know now, I wish I could say I was surprised. But it's kind of a textbook profile, and we now know that people like this don't hide in the shadows. They seek out positions of trust, access, and authority around children. So what happened after he was caught? Well, there's good news and bad news, I'm afraid. The good news is that Neal was arrested in 2007 and linked to over 300 images of CSA content. The bad news was that his sentences across Thailand and Canada were repeatedly reduced. And unfortunately, by 2017, he was released and currently lives in Vancouver, Canada under court restrictions. So, yes, this monster from a global internet manhunt is still living in Canada to this day. The Mr. Swirlface case was a wake-up call for the entire world about the dangers of the internet. It proved that crime had officially moved into the digital age, and it forced law enforcement to evolve and develop divisions that specialize in cybercrime. And it was another heartbreaking realization that predators don't just lurk in dark alleys. They hide behind computer screens, they hide behind trust, and sometimes they hide behind something as stupid as a swirl filter.
I think we as a society all moved on a little bit too fast from what took place inside this house. Because what do you mean 6 members of the same family and 2 girls who were sleeping over were all bludgeoned to death with an axe one by one as they slept? And the killer literally snuck inside the house and waited for them to all fall fast asleep and waited for them to get home before striking. And not to mention the killer watching the family through a hole in the barn for some time before killing them. And I think the creepiest fact that has honestly made me lose sleep is that after this family was brutally murdered, the killer covered up all of the mirrors in the house with either blankets or some of the victims' clothes, which to this day no one has an explanation for. This is the disturbing case of the Villisca axe murders, and one thing that you should know is that the person who did this was never caught, and they could be responsible for numerous other axe murders in the area, so let's talk about it. This is the Moore family. You have mom and dad, Josiah and Sarah, and their 4 kids. 11-year-old Herman, 10-year-old Mary, 7-year-old Arthur, and 5-year-old Paul. In 1912, they all lived pretty happy together in this quaint little farmhouse in the remote countryside town of Villisca, Iowa. The Moore family was a really respected family in the community and super well liked, which makes what happened to them even more mysterious and disturbing. So the story begins on June 9th, 1912. That evening, little Mary invited 2 of her friends over for a sleepover. They were the Stillinger sisters, so 11-year-old Lena and 8-year-old Ina, and the 3 were all super close. That evening, the Moore family, along with Lena and Ina, went to night service at their church and participated in the children's day program. Sarah Moore kind of put this together and coordinated the whole thing, so this was an activity that the family did a lot. The service went great as usual and ended around 9:30 p.m., and after, the Moore family, along with the Stillinger sisters, walked back to the Moore's old farmhouse. They all got back home just before 10 p.m., and then they went to bed just like every other night. But between midnight and 2 a.m., someone would sneak into their home and bludgeon them all to death with an axe. Nobody would know anything was wrong until about 7 the next morning. One of their neighbors grew concerned when the family never came outside to tend to their morning chores, something they did daily. So she tried knocking on the door but received no answer. And at this point, she was so concerned that she even tried letting herself into the Moore house. But all of the windows and doors had been locked from the inside, so she couldn't get in. This is when she called Josiah's brother, who, once he got there also tried knocking on the door and calling out for his family, but again, he received no response. When he used his spare key to let himself inside, he discovered a gruesome scene. There in the parlor was the door to the guest bedroom, and once he opened it, he found the bodies of Lena and Ina deceased on the bed. At this point, he ran out of the house and notified authorities, and when they arrived on scene, they discovered something straight out of a horror movie. They found the entire Moore family dead in their beds as well, having been brutally bludgeoned to death with an axe. This was an extremely bloody scene, and unlike anything the local police had ever seen. Police found that the murder weapon, which was an axe, actually belonged to the Moore family, and it was found in the guest bedroom laying next to the Stillinger sisters. What's so incredibly creepy is that the killer carefully wiped all of the blood off the axe, so it was clean. As police moved through the house, it just kept getting creepier. Every single window and mirror in the home had been covered by the killer with either a blanket or some of the victims' clothing. Once the autopsies began, authorities were able to somewhat piece together a timeline of the horrific attack. So the coroner believes the victims were all killed between midnight and 2 a.m. and that the attack started with Josiah and Sarah. Based on evidence found in the attic, which were 2 cigarette butts, police believe that the killer snuck in and patiently waited for the family in the attic to get home, fall asleep, and begin killing. So like I said, the attack started with Josiah and Sarah as they slept. The parents were viciously struck several times with the sharp end of the axe, and Josiah's face was cut so badly that his eyes were just no longer there. And to give you an idea of how much force the killer used, he literally gouged and carved the ceiling above Josiah and Sarah's bed from when he was lifting the axe to strike them. Like, this was complete rage and overkill. After the parents were killed, the killer then attacked their children one by one as they all slept too. Outside of the parents, every other victim was attacked using the blunt end of the axe, but they were still bludgeoned to death in the head area. After he killed the kids, the killer then went back up to Josiah and Sarah's room and began striking them again, even though it was clear they were already dead. As he was doing this, the killer knocked over one of Josiah's shoes, which had been laying nearby, and it was just filled with blood. After this, the killer then made his way down to the guest bedroom, where he started his attack with 8-year-old Ina. She too was bludgeoned multiple times with the blunt end of the axe, but since her sister Lena was laying right next to her in the same bed, she woke up from the commotion. Everyone else had been attacked and killed while they slept, except for Lena, who tried to fight back. Sadly, she stood no chance, and she was killed as well. She was found laying across the bed on her stomach, and she was nude from the waist down. After she was dead, the killer took off her clothes and moved her body, positioning her so that her private area was exposed. According to the autopsy report, there was no sign of SA, so authorities don't know why the killer took off her clothes. Maybe that was the initial intent, but maybe he got spooked and took off. What's so weird is that right after the Stillinger sisters were killed, the axeman took out a 4-pound slab of bacon from the freezer and laid it next to them, along with the axe, which he cleaned. He then wrapped all of their heads in bedding, which is an important detail to remember for later. Police then found some weird things in the home, one of which was a gas lamp with its glass chimney removed, and the wick was turned down so low that it was only releasing just the faintest bit of light in the house, which is super creepy to think about. The second odd thing found was fragments of a keychain that didn't belong to anyone in the family, and this was found downstairs in the living room. Another super creepy thing that was found was a prepared meal on the kitchen table that sat untouched, as well as a bowl with some blood in it, which police think the killer used to wash off his hands. So even though some weird pieces of evidence were left behind, absolutely nothing was found that could tie anyone to the murders. No DNA, no fingerprints, nothing. The only thing police did find was an imprint in the hay in the family's barn, which was next to a hole in the wood, and police suspect that the killer would sit in this barn and had been observing and watching the family for quite some time before they were killed. And since the cigarette butts were found in the attic of the home, it's suspected that the killer broke in via a window and hid until the family came home, and then maybe they left through the cellar. But this is one of the biggest questions in this case: how exactly they left, because all of the doors and windows to the Moore home were locked from the inside, so it was like the killer just vanished into thin air. Because of how brutal this attack was, it should have been somewhat easy to find some evidence left behind, but that very quickly turned out to not be the case. And that's because police completely botched this investigation right off the bat. So by 9 a.m. the morning of the murders, the town's central telephone had issued an alert to every house in Villisca warning them of the murders and to be careful. Within minutes, the crime scene, aka the Moore house, was completely overrun by the community. Like, hundreds of people from the town trampled all all over the crime scene, either because they were nosy or because they had bad intentions, which some of them did. Some really disturbed people even stole pieces of Josiah's skull to keep as a souvenir. The murder weapon was picked up and handled by so many people, so this destroyed any evidence that was left in that house. It got to the point that the National Guard had to be brought in to ward people off. The bodies were then taken to a local fire station which had been set up as a temporary morgue, and thus the investigation into who did this began. By the next day, police had interviewed 13 people as potential witnesses, which they were hoping would lead them to a suspect. But it never did, and the person who butchered all 8 of these people as they slept has never been found. And to this day, this case remains unsolved. Over the years, there have been many suspects and theories as to who did this and why. First up was any houseless individuals or any stranger to the community. They were looked at first. The first real suspect, though, was Frank Jones, one of Josiah's old business partners and senator for the state of Iowa. Not long before his death, Josiah quit working for Frank and started his own business, so this stole a lot of high-end customers from him. There was also a rumor that Josiah had been having an affair with Frank's daughter-in-law, but this has never been confirmed. Since there was no evidence found at the scene and no real motive here to kill the entire family, Frank was never charged for the crime. The next suspect was William Mansfield, an ex-convict and former U.S. Army soldier. In the months prior to the Villisca murders and for months after, there would be several similar axe murders in surrounding states. They were all brutal and shared some pretty eerie and undeniable connections. This also includes the Axeman of New Orleans case. So in all of these axe murders, every victim was killed in the exact same way, which was an axe. Bedsheets had been used to cover all windows and mirrors in each house, and the killer also wrapped each of the victims' heads in bedsheets and had wiped the axe clean before leaving it behind. But the list goes on. So just like in the Villisca axe murders, a burning lamp with its chimney removed was found at each crime scene, all found at the foot of the bed with the wick turned down so low that only the faintest bit of light came out. Also found at each crime scene was a bowl in the kitchen that contained bloody water, likely so the killer could wash his hands off. And lastly, in each case, the killer left behind no fingerprints, suggesting to police that they wore gloves. So police believe that because of all of these similarities, there's a good possibility that the same killer committed all of these crimes, not just the Villisca axe murders. And how William comes into play is this. There's absolutely no evidence tying him to any of these crimes, but one detective kind of fixated on him. This detective said that he had no proof, but he is certain that William was at each crime scene the night of the murders. His thought process was that William would know to wear gloves since his fingerprints were already in the system from being in the military. So because of his insistence, William was actually arrested on suspicion of the Villisca axe murders. But like I said, there was no physical evidence tying him to the crime, and payroll records from his job actually provided him with an alibi. He was in a different state at the time of the murders, so he was released. A witness later said that he believes that he saw William at a train station nearby the morning after the murders, and that William had told him that he had just walked from Villisca, but how true that is, we don't know. The extended family of the Moores were all cleared, so they had nothing to do with it. And some think that their murder, along with all of the other axe murders nearby, were all committed by one serial killer who has just never been caught. Some think that it's a work of multiple killers, all being inspired by each other. The main suspect in this case, which if you look it up, you'll see his name pop up everywhere, is Reverend George Kelly. George was a traveling minister who just so happened to be in town the night the Moore family was murdered. He also taught at the same church service the family attended right before they were killed. George was described as a really creepy guy and kind of a peeping Tom. He was known to ask young girls to pose nude for him, which is wild being a reverend. He left town really early the next morning, just hours before the bodies were discovered. After they were found, George became obsessed with the case and began writing several letters to police and the Moore's extended family. It was really weird. In 1917, George was finally arrested in connection to this crime, and he actually went to 2 separate trials. He confessed a handful of times, but he was found to have been suffering from some mental health issues, so the jury and authorities never believed him. He was ultimately acquitted, so never charged. And like I said, to this day, the killer has never been found. What's crazy to me is that this was a really old and creaky farmhouse, so how did none of the 8 victims wake up at all that night? The only one who did was Lena, but that was because her sister was being attacked right next to her in the same bed. But this was a brutal, vicious killing by an axe, and the killer exhibited tremendous rage. And back then, the houses weren't very insulated, so it's just weird to me that no one woke up as their family was being attacked. I can only imagine the horrific sounds this caused, and it must have been been pretty loud. Back then, toxicology reports weren't a routine part of the autopsy process, so none were given to any of the victims. But some think that the killer may have drugged them somehow and then waited for them to fall fast asleep before striking. It is so creepy knowing how this family was being watched from a hole in their own barn. It makes me wonder how long they were being watched for and how exactly the killer left. As of today, the Morehouse sits as a tourist destination in the remote town of Villisca. A couple bought the home in 1995 and ripped out all of the modern finishes and renovations that the previous owner had made. They restored the house back to its 1912 condition. The couple now offers tours and overnight stays, and they claim that the house is haunted because of what took place there all those years ago. But it's now been 113 years, and what really took place inside that farmhouse and who was responsible remains a mystery.
On October 11th, 2000, Joshua Maxwell and Tess McFarland committed a terrible crime. On that day, Joshua and Tess fatally shot and unalived the Bexar County Sheriff named Rodolfo Lopez. After his unaliving, they went to a local bank and ended up withdrawing $400 from his account. Rodolfo was then found behind that mall in a field, blindfolded, and his hands had been bound. 6 days later, Tess and Joshua were pulled over after a police chase in San Francisco, and they were driving Rodolfo's vehicle. Some of his belongings were in there, and the 9mm that was used in his crime was found, tested, and later linked to his unaliving and someone else's. A month before they committed the crime on Rodolfo, they had committed another one on someone named Robbie Bott. And this crime did not happen in San Antonio, it actually happened near Indianapolis. They did something very similar, but they forced Robbie to go to an ATM, pull money out, and the very next day they found Robbie's vehicle abandoned, in flames, and the car was left 15 minutes away from Robbie's home. When they went through Robbie's vehicle, they ended up unfortunately finding his body in the trunk, hogtied, and the cause of death was shot to the torso. McFarland pleaded guilty and she got a life sentence, while Maxwell got the death penalty. At just 31 years old, on March 11, 2010, Joshua Maxwell was executed. His last meal was a 6-piece fried chicken with ketchup, 3 bacon cheeseburgers with fries, 6 red Mountain Dews, and a brownie. And one of his last words were, "I hurt a lot of people with the decisions that I made, and I cannot be more sorry than I am right now." Thank you so much for watching this video. I will be doing a lot more death row cases, and if you guys want to come along for this ride, please make sure you follow.
She was snatched off her bike in the middle of the forest and then forced into an underground box where she would suffocate to death. Meanwhile, her parents were receiving sketchy phone calls and horrifying ransom letters. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the case of Ursula Herrmann. This is a shorter version of this case. To hear a fuller deep dive, head over to the True Crime Caitlin podcast. Ursula Herrmann was a 10-year-old girl living in Ehing am Ammersee in Bavaria, Germany. She was described as being like a little ray of sunshine. She always had a smile on her face, she was laughing, she was always happy, she was intelligent, she was energetic, and she had a thing for music. Music was something that she and her brother Michael would really bond over. They enjoyed listening to it and playing it together. And that is exactly what they were doing on the afternoon of the 15th of September 1981. After finishing her first day back at school after the summer break, Ursula went home where she played the piano with Michael for a little bit before heading back out. She would go to a gymnastics lesson in nearby Schondorf, and once that was finished, she went to her auntie's house for a tea and to spend a couple of hours playing with her cousins. Her mother, Mrs. Herrmann, would eventually ring her auntie and ask the auntie to send Ursula home. It was now around about 7:20 p.m. and Ursula was to cycle through a nearby forest and get home for 7:30 p.m. But she never made it. Around about half an hour later, Mrs. Herrmann rang the auntie back up to ask her, "Can you send Ursula home now?" and was shocked to hear that Ursula had already left 25 minutes ago. The journey should have only taken Ursula around about 10 minutes, and so as soon as Mrs. Herrmann heard this, she was worried. Mr. Herrmann and the uncle would both leave their houses on each side of the forest, and they would both walk along the path that Ursula should have cycled down. They both hoped that they would bump into her, having either fallen off her bike or was stood talking to a friend. However, she was nowhere to be seen. After doing their own quick search of the forest, the Herrmanns would contact the police to report their daughter missing. Hundreds of officers would descend on the forest, searching nearby the path on foot, and divers even went into a nearby lake. However, it wouldn't be until hours later that they got their first terrifying break. A sniffer dog would discover Ursula's red bike around about 20 metres off of the path, found on the ground upturned. This being a horrifying confirmation that she was gone and likely someone had taken her, dragging her off the bike. While officers continued their search through the forest, back at the Herman home, the phone began to ring, and when one of the parents answered, on the other end all they heard was silence, a scratching, and then a tune of music. They would get another 7 phone calls exactly like this one, the person on the other side not muttering a single word, and the Hermans had no idea what these calls meant, but by the following day it would become abundantly clear. The postman delivered a letter which was addressed to Mr. Herman, and inside there was a ransom note. The person who sent this confirmed that they had kidnapped Ursula and that they wanted what is the equivalent of around about £5 million a day in exchange for her safe return. The Hermans agreed to pay the ransom, and they agreed to all of the demands that would come through from the kidnappers. It got to a point where all that they were waiting for was to be told where to drop off the money and when they could get their daughter back, and it was then that the kidnappers went silent on them, ceasing all contact and going cold. It would be on day 19 after her disappearance that Ursula was discovered. During a search in the denser, more isolated part of the forest, one of the searchers would discover a wooden box which was completely buried under the ground. It was a considerably small box. It was about 70 centimetres by 60 centimetres, so imagine a small coffee table. Upon discovering this, the searcher would rip off the lid of the box, and that is where they discovered the body of 10-year-old Ursula Herman looking up to them. It was determined that she would have suffocated to death within 5 hours of being forced into the box. After receiving an anonymous tip, police would set their sights on local man Werner Mazurek. It would take them almost 30 years to gather evidence against this man, and it was almost 30 years later that they felt like they got their golden ticket. During a 2007 search of his home, they would discover a tape recorder. Why is this significant though? An expert believed that this tape recorder was the exact tape recorder that was used during those ransom calls. When the bit of music was being played down the phone to the Hermans, that was from a recording of a jingle from a local radio station. So someone had recorded that jingle and then was playing it down the phone to the Hermans. And this expert was fully convinced that the recorder that was found inside of Werner's home was the exact one. They were able to determine that because it had a misaligned recording head, so different sounds such as scratches and scrapes that Werner's recorder made were consistent with sounds on the ransom calls. That evidence, along with the fact that Werner had a rocky alibi, in fact initially when he was first questioned he couldn't say what he was doing on the night that Ursula was kidnapped. It would take him a full day to come up with a rocky alibi. He said that he was playing board games with his wife at home. So that, along with the testimony of a man who claimed that Werner had hired him to dig a hole in the ground in that dense part of the forest and help transport the box, was enough for the prosecution to build a case and file a charge against Werner Mazurek. He would be arrested, charged, and then fully convicted of the kidnapping resulting in death of Ursula Herman. What should have been a weight lifted off the family members' shoulders turned into more questions for one of the family members, and that was Michael Herman, Ursula's oldest brother. He wasn't fully convinced of Werner's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. 2 separate pieces of DNA were extracted from the box. One came from a piece of duct tape and another from a screw. Neither of these samples matched Werner, who provided a DNA sample. Michael also believed that other avenues of investigation simply weren't investigated, and those key things, along with several other things, made him question Werner's guilt. He didn't know if he was guilty, but he didn't know if he was innocent either. As of today, Werner Mazurek is still serving a life sentence for a crime that he is adamant he did not commit. This is a very detailed, focused case, I have tried to fit in as much as I can in a TikTok video, but if you would like to hear this case in full, including all of the evidence and the other suspects, make sure to go ahead and stream the newest episode of True Crime with Caitlin right now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Let's talk about some more people who have gone missing in national parks and are still missing. I think this is a great way to spread awareness. Someone out there might know something, so be sure to like and share this video. Okay, first we have Morgan Heimer. He went missing from the Grand Canyon National Park June 2nd, 2015. Heimer was 22 years old when he went missing. White male, 6 feet tall, 175 pounds, blonde hair and blue eyes. Last seen wearing dark-colored Astral personal flotation device, a blue plaid long-sleeve shirt, Chaco brand sandals, a maroon baseball cap, and brightly colored shorts, carrying a purple water bottle. Heimer was last seen on Tuesday, June 2nd, 2015, around Colorado River Mile 213 near Pumpkin Springs. The search for Heimer is in continuous limited mode. I actually recently did a podcast episode on people who have gone missing in national parks, and Morgan is one of the people that I talked about. So if you want to hear like a more in-depth story about Morgan and at the time he went missing, I would go listen to that podcast episode. His is really interesting because honestly, I kind of feel like there might have been some foul play in his missing. Like, his missing case is really weird. Okay, next we have Drake Kramer. He went missing from the Grand Canyon National Park January 31st, 2015. Kramer was 21 years old at the time he went missing. White male, 5'8", 140 pounds, brown hair and blue eyes. Wears dark-colored clothes and is known to wear a backwards ball cap or a dark-colored bandana on his head. Drove a silver Mazda 6 sedan to the park. Kramer was last seen at the Bright Angel Lodge, and he is believed to have SI, so thoughts of himself. The search for Kramer is in continuous limited mode. His case makes me sad because of the thoughts that he is prone to having. Maybe he went missing on purpose, maybe not, but either way, somebody might know something or see something. Okay, next we have Derek J. Luking, missing from the Great Smoky Mountains National Park on March 17th, 2012. Luking was 24 years old at the time he went missing. White male, 5'11", 220 pounds, green eyes, brown hair, short beard. Last seen wearing black track pants, white tennis shoes. Possibly had Realtree camouflage rain gear with him and a small dark-colored day pack. Luking was last seen leaving the Microtel Hotel on March 3rd, 2012 in Cherokee, North Carolina. His car was found parked in the lower lot of Newfound Gap at the North Carolina-Tennessee state line. Luking's direction of travel from Newfound Gap is unknown. Okay, next we have Adam Clayton Lyle Jones. He went missing from the Grand Canyon National Park March 31st, 2011. 23-year-old male, 5'7", 140 pounds, blue eyes, light brown hair. Jones was last seen by family in Gulf Breeze, Florida on March 31st, 2011. His vehicle was found in the Grand Canyon National Park at the Grand Canyon Visitors Center on May 5th, 2011. Okay, next we have George Pensa. He went missing from the Yosemite National Park June 17th, 2011. Pensa, I think it's Pensa. I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. But he was 30 years old when he went missing. White male, 5'10", 240 pounds, dark brown hair, blue eyes. Last seen wearing gray sweatpants with a white stripe down the leg, either a black t-shirt with D&B on the front or a black tank top, and gray and blue running shoes. He was carrying a blue cloth bag. He was hiking with a group when he became separated and went off by himself. He was last seen at about 2:40 p.m. on June 17, 2011 at the top of Upper Yosemite Falls.
This 17-year-old girl disappeared after a night out with friends, and her body wasn't found for months. This is the story of Emily Meng. Emily was born in 1999 and lived in the small town of Korsør, Denmark. I hope I'm saying that right. She was known to be creative and kind, and she was deeply loved by her family and friends. Emily was a talented singer. She performed in her church choir and dreamed of pursuing a career in music one day. She was 17 years old. She had just finished school for the summer, so she wanted to spend all of her free time hanging out with her friends. I did the same thing when I was 17. On July 10th, 2016, Emily went out with two close friends in Slagelse, a nearby town. Hopefully I'm saying that one right too. They stayed out late, laughing, taking photos, having a good time, catching up, doing typical teenager activities. At 3 a.m., the girls arrived at the train station to head home. Emily got off at her Corsair stop, which was just a short walk to her home, but unfortunately she never made it back home. When Emily didn't return home that morning, her family immediately reported her as missing. It was very unlike Emily to not come home after hanging out with friends for a night. So police began searching, but there were immediate concerns brought up by her family that the search was just going too slow and police weren't moving fast enough. And despite searches and media attention to this case, days turned into weeks, which turned into months, with no sign of Emily. Emily's face was everywhere in Denmark. In the media, it was on posters in newspapers, but no trace of her was found. Until December 24th, 2016, more than 5 months later, when a dog walker found human remains near a small village of Borup, about 65 kilometers, which is roughly 40 miles, from where Emily disappeared. And dental records later confirmed that it was her. A medical examiner later determined that Emily had been unalived and dumped on the side of the road. For years, there were no arrests, and this became one of Denmark's most haunting unsolved cases. Police faced lots of criticism for their slow movement in the early days of the investigation, and the public began demanding justice. Then in April of 2023, a major break in the case came. A 32-year-old man was arrested. His name was not released at the time, but he was already in custody for a separate violent kidnapping and assault of another young woman in 2022. Authorities linked him to the Emily Meng case through forensic evidence, including items found in his property near Corsair, just a few kilometers from where Emily vanished. The man, who had once worked as a car mechanic and lived a quiet, seemingly ordinary life, was charged with her unaliving and remains in custody as proceedings continue. Emily Meng was just 17 years old. She had a family and friends who absolutely adored her. Her friends still talk about her laugh and how she had dreams of becoming a professional singer. She had dreams of becoming a professional singer that she never got to fulfill. And her case forever changes how missing person cases are handled in Denmark. That is everything I have on this case. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I hope whoever he is, whatever his name is, he rots behind bars for life. I post true crime videos, so if you like this type of content, follow so you don't miss my next video, and please stay safe out there because you never know what's right around the corner.
This teacher essayed a 14-year-old student but was determined too pretty to go to prison. Deborah Lefebvre always wanted to be a teacher and got her dream job in 2002 as a middle school English teacher in the Tampa area. After her first year of teaching, Deborah met Owen and the two were married only 8 months later. But less than 1 year after tying the knot, Owen got suspicious that his new bride was being unfaithful. He thought that she was having an affair with another teacher and Deborah was sleeping with someone at school. But I doubt Owen could ever imagine that that would be a 14-year-old student. At the start of the 2003-2004 school year, Deborah started dressing really inappropriately for a middle school teacher, you know, like short skirts and low-cut tight tops, and she started getting a lot of attention from the middle school boys that she was teaching. And you know, Deborah did not want to be an authority figure despite going into a career of teaching. She wanted to be friends with her students, you know, like one of their peers. But Deborah would still refer to her male students as little boys when talking to her husband or her friends, so it's like she knows that they're children, which makes what Deborah did next so disturbing. Deborah's victim's identity has been protected, so we're just gonna refer to him as Jay. Jay has been described as like a popular jock type. You know, he was athletic and funny, but he's also been described as very immature because, you know, he's 14 in middle school, not even in high school yet. When Jay met Deborah, Mrs. Lefebvre, he had just turned 14 and, you know, he thought that she was really attractive, so he would flirt with her, and Deborah liked the attention, so she didn't tell him to stop. The two got particularly close on a school field trip that Deborah was chaperoning. And for the rest of the school year, Deborah was pretty much by the book grooming this child. She was always trying to get him alone in her classroom. Even though he wasn't one of the students in her class, she would offer him ride homes and also buy him gifts. And Jay began bragging to his 13 and 14-year-old friends that he was going to sleep with Mrs. Lefebvre. On the last day of the school year, Deborah gave Jay detention so they could have alone time in her classroom. During detention, Deborah told Jay that she was thinking of him, that she had feelings for him. She lifted up her shirt and then kissed him.
Jay went home and called his 15-year-old cousin that we're just gonna call cousin for this video, and he told cousin that a hot teacher liked him, but cousin didn't really believe Jay, so Jay was gonna prove it to him. During that summer break, 24-year-old Deborah, 14-year-old Jay, and 15-year-old cousin would hang out while Deborah's husband was at work. Deborah started dressing like a teenager, using a baby voice, and would even put her hair in pigtails, and she told Jay that the forbidden, inappropriate nature of their relationship was a turn-on. In early June, Deborah picked up Jay and cousin for the first time and brought them back to her place, where she took Jay into the bedroom that she shared with her husband and performed an act on him. Then on the drive home, she instructed cousin to take over the driving even though he was 15 and didn't have a driver's license, so she could do another act on Jay in the back seat. A few days later, Deborah told Jay to meet her at her classroom, even though they had no business being there because school had ended 2 weeks prior. But Deborah wanted a private place for them to go all the way. And this was Jay's first time ever, and Deborah would statutory S him 3 times in 4 days. The next time was when Jay's 15-year-old cousin was illegally driving Deborah's car once again, and Jay and Deborah were in the back seat, and 15-year-old cousin was watching it through the rearview mirror. And then the last time was once again in Deborah's car when they were parked at a playground while cousin was waiting outside the car. This all came to light when a friend of cousin's mom saw him out with an older, provocatively dressed woman. And cousin's mom confronted cousin about this, but of course he lied. But then that same night, his mother overheard him on the phone with a friend saying that his cousin was sleeping with a hot teacher. Cousin's mom called her sister, which was Jay's mom, and Jay just admitted everything, so his mom called the police. The police had Jay call Deborah so she would incriminate herself over the phone call while they recorded it. On the phone call, Jay said that he was nervous because they hadn't used protection the 3 times that they hooked up, but Deborah said it was okay, you don't have to use protection. And then Jay asked if they wanted to meet up again so they could hook up, and Deborah said yes. But when Deborah showed up to hook up with this middle school boy once again for the 4th time, the police were already waiting for her and they arrested her, and she was facing 15 years in prison. And very quickly this made international news because at the time this kind of thing was still pretty unheard of, and Deborah was seen as so beautiful, so this was a huge scandal. Something very controversial that happened after Deborah was arrested was some male officers actually forced her to take off all of her clothing so they could photograph literally every single inch of her body as evidence so they could match it up with the way that Jay described her body. And I personally have never heard of something like this. You have to let me know if you've heard of this in any kind of case before. But Deborah actually went on to say that this incident felt like she was the actual victim of SA. And very famously, during court, Deborah's defense attorney said to the judge that she was too pretty to go to prison. And although she was facing 15 years in prison, Deborah walked away with no jail time. Yeah, you heard that right. She was sentenced to 3 years of house arrest and 7 years of probation, but she ended up getting early release on house arrest and probation. And Deborah's husband, Owen, did stick by her for a while, but eventually did file for divorce. And this is gonna sound pretty bad, but I actually have little sympathy for Owen. He ended up cashing out on a book he wrote about the situation that he called Gorgeous Disaster, the tragic story of Deborah LaFave, where he really paints Deborah as the victim and really dismisses all the trauma of the actual victim, a 14-year-old, because I cannot stress this enough. It does not matter the gender of a victim. It's a 14-year-old. If you're watching this and you don't see Deborah as a predator, I cannot stress this enough, you are part of the problem, because I don't care if you're a boy and this was your dream when you were in middle school, in high school. If you're an adult now and you don't have a problem with a grown person being attracted to someone in middle school, then you're just a creep. And to this day, Deborah has pretty much stayed out of the limelight, even though she was a household name and kind of seen as a celebrity for a while. She thinks of herself as a good person. She is a Christian now, she remarried, she's a mother now, but to this day has never shown any remorse for what she did. And if you watched the end of this video, appreciate you guys so much. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever even heard of this case before? I'm sure some of my older audience definitely has heard of this before. And while you're in the comments, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Until then, love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with another video.
You can't make this stuff up. might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
In 1978, 19-year-old Jill Brown left for work but never arrived. She took nothing with her and has now been missing without a trace for 47 years. This is the unsolved disappearance of Jill Brown. Jill lived with her family in a small seaside town of Dovercote in Essex. The Browns were a very close, loving family. Jill was one of 3 daughters and her parents owned a small cafe and convenience shop. The family lived above the shop together with Jill's grandmother. Jill's sister said that she was incredibly generous, always willing to help, and had a wicked sense of humour. Jill worked at a laundrette, and after the Christmas holidays on the 3rd of January 1978, she got up for work, had breakfast, and left the house as normal. She usually walked to work, meeting a friend along the way, and the walk itself took about an hour. When Jill finished work, she would take the bus home, and her sister Libby would always wait for her at the bus stop. But at 5:30 p.m, when the bus arrived, Jill wasn't on it, something Libby immediately found odd. At first, the family thought that Jill may have just missed the bus or stopped to chat with someone. But as the evening went on and 8 p.m. approached, real worry started to set in. They first checked with Jill's friend who she normally walked to work with, but Jill's friend was actually off sick that day, so she hadn't walked to work with Jill. They then contacted Jill's work colleagues who told them that Jill actually never arrived for work that day at all. Jill's dad, Will, then contacted the police, but they told him he needed to wait 24 hours before reporting her missing. A delay that, as we know, costs crucial time in a search. That night, Jill's father was out searching the area for her, but had no luck in finding her. Because of the delay, the investigation lost even more valuable time when the police began treating Jill's parents as potential suspects. Her case received little to no media attention. A week after she disappeared, her story appeared in the local paper, but it took an entire year for it to reach national press. And even then, it wasn't front page news. Witnesses along Jill's route that morning recalled seeing her and said she looked happy and her normal self, but no one knew what happened to her after that, or even saw where she went or if she was with anybody. Jill is 5'2" and at the time had shoulder-length brown hair. Also has a scar on her stomach from an operation she underwent when she was a child. What makes her disappearance especially strange is that she took nothing with her. No money, no spare clothes, nothing at all. Her family were deeply affected, particularly her sister Janet and Libby. Her case remains open with Essex Police, and Jill is still listed as a long-term missing person. She is also on the Missing Persons Charity website under reference 97-000614.
Is her dead son on display at a museum because she is convinced he is? Chris Eric was born in Mesquite in Texas, and he was an incredibly kind guy. He absolutely loved sport. He was an incredible athlete, but he was also really religious. He was always super happy and making people laugh, but like I said, he would attend church very regularly. He was very serious about his faith. There were honestly no real signs that his life was about to end in the most tragic and unsettling way. But in 2012, when Chris was 23, he was struggling with addiction, and I believe he was taking Adderall. For some reason, the police were involved, and Chris had been ordered to go to court for something sort of substance abuse related, but charges were later dropped. Now, Chris did show up for court and headed back home afterwards to his nan's house. 2 days after, he was found dead in his bed. Chris's mum, Kim, said she wasn't there at the time. She was just told that he died in his sleep peacefully, but that didn't really make much sense for a 23-year-old. The initial narrative was, oh, he had a heart defect and he had a heart attack. But after Kim pressed the medical examiner, the cause of death changed. He was allegedly found to have cyanide in his system, literal poison. And despite how suspicious that sounds, officials documented his death as undetermined means and ruled it a self-unaliving. But things get even weirder. Kim was told that her son was cremated, and obviously when you have a relative cremated, you don't literally go in and watch that happen. You kind of just have to take their word for it. But later she had this horrific shock when she visited a museum in Vegas. Over a decade after her son's mysterious death, while attending this Real Bodies exhibition, she stopped dead in her tracks. The one body on display was the spitting image of her son. So much so that she was stunned into silence. She was shocked to her core. She said, I was actually looking at my son's skinned, butchered body. She said it was gut-wrenching. And apparently it wasn't just the face that looked identical. It was markings on his actual body, like scarring that Chris had, which got Kim thinking, Has my son actually been sold to this museum? Now, I know this sounds crazy, but I have seen cases where family members had no idea that their loved ones' bodies were actually being sold. Families have sometimes been told a loved one was cremated when they actually weren't, but it's hard to tell whether it's true in this case. Kim is battling to get what she believes to be her dead son's body back. But the exhibit said there is no factual basis for these allegations. We extend our sympathy to the family, but the referenced specimen cannot be associated with the individual named in these claims. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think this could possibly be true?
The only evidence they ever found was the van. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Christopher Kersey. Viewer discretion is advised. Christopher Matthew Kersey was born on February 19th, 1973, and he was one of 3 brothers. He was the oldest, and he was close with his brothers. He seemed like a normal, happy kid, nothing really out of the ordinary. His parents said that Christopher was absolutely a bookworm. He loved to read. He was a varsity swimmer, and he played the clarinet at school. And at school, he had friends, but he was really more of an introvert. But when he wanted to have fun, he would love skiing, he would love going paintballing. There just were never any red flags. His parents would say that shortly before all of this, that Christopher did appear to be struggling with something, but maybe they really couldn't quite put their finger on it. The Kersey family lived in Eagan, Minnesota, which is right here just below Minneapolis, and the date was April 20th, 1990. Christopher told his mom he was feeling pretty sick that day and asked if he could stay home from school. She said yes. And once she had left for work, there was nobody at home other than Christopher. When they got home later that afternoon, they noticed that their 1988 light blue Dodge Caravan, it's not this exact one, but very similar to this, was no longer in the driveway. And when entering the home, Christopher wasn't home. They did find a note, however, written by Christopher addressed to the parents. The note read, quote, "Mom, something important came up, plus feeling somewhat better. I'll be back by 6 unless I get lost. Love, Chris." The word lost, for some reason, was underlined twice. It could be looked at as something kind of suspicious, but also his mom and dad would say that when he drove, it was easy for him to get lost and turned around. They also quickly learned that Christopher had withdrew $200 from his bank account, but all of his belongings, from what it looked like, were still at home. Like, he didn't seem to pack any bags or anything. Thinking he might be an actual runaway, they still report him missing to police because he is still 17 years old. The day after, the parents get a letter. The note told the parents that Christopher lied about being sick. And he did so with the purpose of being able to take the van without anyone noticing or stopping him. It said that he didn't even know where he intended to go. There was also a mention that Christopher intended to take his own life and apologized to his family. Also missing from the home was a gun, and I guess also he had his watch with him. However, all of the ammunition that they had purchased for the gun was still at the house. 2 days after this, 200 miles north of Eagan in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, the van is found. There was no evidence in the van that suggested where he had gone. No sign of an altercation or foul play. There was nothing of evidentiary value to help put police in the right direction. If the intent was for Christopher to take his life, that would explain why he didn't bring anything else along with him. A side note here is that the band Soul Asylum, they have a very popular song called Runaway Train. And in that song, they feature several missing children. And Christopher was one of the kids featured in the music video. It was just their way of trying to help bring some of these kids home. Several years later, in 2004, the parents and I think the police department received a letter basically telling them to stop looking for Christopher, that he would finally return home when he was ready. And over the years, the parents would get these random phone calls where there's really just static on the other end. In one of the phone calls, they thought they heard a bunch of people like at a party, but then the person would just hang up. But the Eagan Police Department would determine that the phone calls that were made over the years and the recent letter in 2004 were all very likely just a hoax. Christopher's parents also closely followed the Jacob Wetterling case because Jacob Wetterling had disappeared just a few months prior to Matthew. When Jacob Wetterling was found in 2016, it kind of renewed their interest, causing police to search in wider areas near where the van was found, like doing ground searches. But they never found anything. If still alive today, Christopher Kersey would look something similar to this. But there have been no sightings of him, no confirmed sightings. Nobody has heard from him. Could Christopher have intended to run away and that was it? And then just along the way, he met the wrong person who then did God knows what? Did Christopher actually end his own life? That letter that was sent the day after he disappeared, was that truly from him? Unfortunately, it's all still a mystery. But someone somewhere out there might know what truly happened to Christopher Kersey on that April day in 1990. Perhaps that someone is you. If you can even just help bring him home to lay him to rest, that would be huge. If you have any information, please contact the police at 612-454-3900.
One morning in late November of 1979, a 64-year-old man named John Perrin walked through a park near his home in East London, South Africa, which is a small coastal town. The park was basically a forested area that ran right along the coastline, so even though John was walking on a trail through all these trees, he could literally hear the ocean waves crashing down on the beach below. And being out here was actually a pretty big deal for John, because he didn't come to this park very often. In fact, he pretty much never left his house, because John was a total recluse. And, in addition to not leaving his house, he basically spoke to nobody. He didn't have friends, didn't have family. He basically had this one cousin he spoke to sometimes on the phone, but that was it. This guy was very isolated. But today, something in John had told him to go outside and go to this park and take a walk. It was just like this kind of weird intuition that he couldn't even explain. But he just hadn't questioned it, and here he was, doing what his gut was telling him to do. So now, he followed the trail through the woods and listened to the ocean down below, and he eventually went around this bend, and when he did, he saw there was somebody on the trail up ahead. It was this young man who John had never seen before, and this young man looked really anxious. He was sort of pacing back and forth on the trail, like he was trying to maybe build up the nerve to do something. At least that's what John's first impression was. Now, to John, this guy did not feel like a threat to him. It just seemed sort of odd what he was doing, and so John was curious, and so he continued walking down the trail closer to this guy to see what was happening here. Remember, John thinks he's here for some really divine reason in some ways. He doesn't really know what it is. He thinks his gut intuition has brought him here. Maybe it's this guy. And so he's walking down the trail, sizing up what he's doing. And as he gets closer to this man who's pacing back and forth, John realizes that the man is sort of pacing up to the edge of this cliff. Basically, again, this park sits right on the coastline, but the coastline is way down below. And John realizes this guy is pacing back and forth to the cliff and then going back over to the cliff and then back. And this is a massive drop off. This cliff is all the way down to the beach, easily a fatal fall if you were to fall off the cliff. And suddenly it clicks for John. This young man is contemplating taking his own life. He's working up the courage to jump off the cliff. At least that's what John is thinking. The young man is so locked in on what he's doing, he's barely even registering that John is here. He's still just pacing, building up the courage, again, it appeared, to jump off this cliff. And so John's standing there, not really sure what to do. And also there were these other people that were also on the trail that had sort of taken notice of the situation. And there was this crowd forming, sort of standing a little bit back of this young man, not wanting to unintentionally, startle him and get him to jump off the cliff. Everyone's just kind of standing there watching. But for John, as he's standing there, almost paralyzed, not knowing what to do, he's watching this guy go back and forth. And then it was like everything clicked. Suddenly, John understood why he was here. His gut instinct had brought him here to go up and interact with this young man. And so John broke from the crowd. He walked up to this young man who was still pacing back and forth, and he put his arm around the young man, and he looked at him and he said, "I'll show you how it's done." And then John walked to the edge of the cliff and jumped. And the young man was so shocked by this that he just stood there and he watched as John plummeted down to the beach below and smashed into the ground and died. And this young man, he's so horrified by this, so shocked, that he decided, he wasn't going to jump after all. Seeing it happen, seeing John do the thing that this young man was there to do, to jump off this cliff, to take his own life, to see somebody else do it was so awful that he decided not to do it. And so as he's having this revelation, the young man also distinctly felt grateful to John, for doing what he did, because in watching what happened to him, it showed the young man that in fact, he did want to live.